Welcome back. President-elect Barack Obama has said repeatedly during his campaign that he would like to shift America's focus from Iraq to Afghanistan. The new approach places heavy emphasis on diplomacy and negotiations. While the top priority would be the capture of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, Barack Obama's assistant said more work would be done to stabilize the war-torn country. Experts say that Western attempts to, quote, kill our way to victory have not been successful, and even dialogue, even with the Taliban, could become an option. And of course, you can join us with your questions and comments anytime. I'm joined by Mark Schneider, the Senior Vice President of the International Crisis Group based here in Washington, D.C. He's an expert in post-conflict reconstruction and nation building. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So the significance of Afghanistan seems to have come back with the arrival of a Barack or pending Barack Obama administration. How important or how delayed has this been? How important has it been to focus on Afghanistan and been missed until now?
Well, I think that what you've seen over the course of the past year or two, and particularly this past year, has been a tremendous increase in violence and the capacity of the Taliban to carry out terrorist actions inside Afghanistan, including in the major cities. I was in Kabul about a year ago, and the hotel that I stayed at was bombed this February, nearly killing the Norwegian foreign minister.
It's interesting, you testified before the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on the Middle East and South Asia in April of this year. The figures you quoted were in that testimony were fairly startling, that suicide bombers in Afghanistan were up 27% in 2007 compared with the year before, but 600% higher when compared with 2005, and insurgent attacks increasing 400% since 2005. Is this like a rising trend? Is
Without any question. Over the course of the past 2 years, the Taliban has not only expanded the frequency of their attacks, but the area. In other words, they've been attacking not only along the border from Pakistan, but also into the major cities. And that clearly has been a change and a shift, and it's indicated the fundamental need for change in policy, strategy, and allocation of resources to that effort.
Interestingly enough, there's talk now about talks with even the Taliban. How likely is it that the U.S. government will talk with the Taliban, you think?
Well, I think that there's been a lot of talk, perhaps on the hope that the Taliban could either be divided so that those who were willing to give up their arms and accept the governmental structure would be able to do so. But remember that the leadership of the Taliban has been quite clear about their desire to essentially recapture control of Afghanistan and to impose again the kind of extremist regime that existed in the past.
It seems with the attacks that we saw in schoolgirls and so on recently with like almost like an acid substance because of the hijab and so on, it seems that extremism is quite resurgent.
Unfortunately, apparently it is. I think that one has to look at this as an insurgency that's going to take some time to defeat. The several studies by Rand and others have said that once an insurgency like this flares up, that it takes nearly a decade to be able to remove it. And the fundamental issues are not necessarily just military. They're building institutions and the rule of law that people trust. They're developing some kind of economic response. And they're demonstrating to the people that the government really is responding to their needs.
There's an interesting word that perhaps Iran might be asked to help mediate with the Taliban as well. What role would you see Iran playing, and is it likely?
Well, I'm not sure about playing a role in terms of negotiating or facilitating negotiations, but Iran is clearly one of the major actors in the region. And either they're going to encourage an effort to either defeat or bring the Taliban to end its insurgency, or they're going to be, as they have in the past, somewhat counterproductive in recent years. Remember, initially, they were really quite helpful at the outset in supporting the effort to get rid of the Taliban.
We've got a call on the line from London. Let's get Iwa with this question to you, sir. Iwa, what would you like to ask?
Hello, Ruskan. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you. Thanks for being with us. What's your question, Iwa?
Well, I'm calling from London. My question is, in my comment regarding the NATO strategy in Afghanistan, is the only reason it is not working. In my area, last 6 months ago, they targeted the Dividing Party. So it means they are not capable to fight with Taliban underground. They are using the Air Force. This is the only reason that they're driving the people from the government. They're driving the people away from the the government and the people are joining the Taliban.
Okay.
The only reason.
Yeah, well, let me put that to Mr. Schneider. It's an interesting point that he's saying that the way that NATO has handled this and perhaps the US-led forces have handled this is driving people away from the support for the government.
And they are entering to the people's house without any warning.
All right. Well, let's get Mr. Schneider's comment on this.
Two things. One is I think that the lack of adequate ground forces, if you will, in Afghanistan has resulted in the U.S. and NATO perhaps using air power far more extensively than anyone would recommend. In fact, General Barno, who used to be in command of the U.S. forces there, was quite critical of the increased use of air power, because inevitably there are accidents and there are excesses. But the other point that the gentleman made with respect to drug trafficking, that's quite critical. That we know that the bulk of the drug traffickers or the opium growers in Helmand, for example, they actually pay taxes to the Taliban, and therefore the Taliban is acquiring additional resources as a result of the drug trafficking issue.
Has that issue? I mean, of course, it's brought up from time to time. Has that issue of drug trafficking been seriously taken seriously by?
No. The problem is that up until very recently, the U.S. and NATO simply said that's not our business, and did relatively little to use their efforts to target the processors and the convoys. And that really is what needs to be done. There needs to be a much greater law enforcement effort, but even more important for the small farmers, there needs to be an alternative economic opportunity provided in terms of agriculture and in terms of other assistance. They need to be given some help if they're going to be expected to give up on growing opium.
We've got a very active chat room on Live Station as we go out live, so let me get a couple of questions from our chat room. Mohammed from Wisconsin says, why are democratic organizations, especially the Revolutionary Association of Women of Afghanistan, being sidestepped by NATO and the UN, and what will be the impact on nation building?
Well, I think that there needs to be a much greater effort to engage at the local level. Afghan organizations, strengthen the local government, develop a local police that the people see as someone that they go to for protection instead of people that they fear as a threat.
Well, interestingly enough, another one that came in from the chat room from Sebastian says, does Mark Schneider see any future, or see any plan for fragmenting the country along ethnic lines as a way to save face for the coalition?
No, I think that the argument rather is to try and reduce, if you will, ethnic dominance over different sections, recognize that there are legitimate areas where local tribes have influence, work with them, and try and encourage them to be part of a national project.
It seems that the government of Hamid Karzai, I mean, it's almost like an implausible government. It's an enclave that really doesn't seem to be in touch with the rest of the country then.
Well, one of the arguments has been that by failing to successfully deal with the problems of drug trafficking and corruption, that the central government has given up a substantial amount of space to the Taliban. And I think one of the arguments is that the international community has to work much more closely with the Karzai government, and now in a transition, because there's going to be a new election next year, to try and find a way to engage the country as a whole in economic development efforts.
Well, Mr. Schneider, I have to thank you very much for your comments here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us on the next show. Nation of Islam Minister Louis Farrakhan has been a very influential voice in America, especially among African Americans. We'll get his perspective. Make sure you join us for that. See you next time.